Yeah, that I was looking at. Anyway, I'm ready when you guys are.
Did you guys look at the survey thing?
I did.
Absolutely did not.
Okay, take a
Anything-
second. So when we
anything
talk about
good?
I
it,
didn't fill
really?
it out, but I looked at it.
I didn't fill it out either.
I was kind of confused about Drees's article. I maybe I'm just having trouble processing it, but those numbers from that's 2016.
Yes,
okay.
that's the last time they gave it.
Okay,
So
that's what was confusing me.
Okay.
I'm like, they have the survey and they have the results. Like, is it real time? And I just didn't see the caption.
I'd like to know how many pages this survey is. Like, it has 3 questions and then it says next. How many times do you think it does that?
He says it's going to take about 15 minutes to complete.
Oh, Jesus.
Which is why I didn't complete it.
Yeah.
Right away. I will complete it at some point, but
yeah.
So the key points here is the results will be presented at the next DrupalCon. When is that? Let's see. He does
July.
say
It's the global DrupalCon
the global one,
extravaganza.
The other thing I thought was interesting is there's no deadline on this that I could find. It's not written in his thing, and when you go to the survey, it's just a Survey Monkey. It doesn't show up there either as a deadline. So
probably until they're ready to actually start looking at the results.
So why don't we got how many topics here? We got 3. Why don't we just Nick, you sort of kick off each topic, and then John and I could just jump in with comments.
Sure.
Does that sound all right?
Who added the Claro one?
I did.
Okay.
I put them all in here. I don't know if anyone added any notes.
I added some notes around the blog view stuff, but other than that, I did not.
When I looked at it, it was just Claro, and I looked at it this morning again. It had user one. When I looked at it yesterday, it just had the most of the view stuff. I didn't know how to put this in here, but I kind of disagree with most of the comments on the view page, embedded view, so I figured I would just comment on them as we're talking about them.
Yeah, I got mixed feelings about that whole thing. I just thought it was interesting when it came up the other day. So,
yeah.
All right, let's roll. Let me just see. We've got audio recording here. We've got Zoom recording. So whenever you're ready.
All right, I'm ready.
Can you maybe fix your camera a little bit so your head's more centered?
Right. How's that?
It's great.
Okay, ready? This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 246, This and That. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our thoughts continue to remain with the Drupal community as the world continues to fight COVID-19. On today's show, we reach into our list of topics and pull out a few. Let me try that part again. We'll just start from the top.
Want to do the whole thing? Let's just do the whole thing again. It'd be easier for me to edit it.
Yeah, I can do that. Okay.
Yeah. That's always helpful.
This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 246, This and That. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our thoughts are with the Drupal community and the world as we continue to fight COVID-19. On today's show, we reach into our list of topics and pull out a few for discussion, including views, pages versus blocks, Claro theme, and user one. Before we jump into the show, John, what's new with you this week?
Well, I had an interesting conversation with a fellow Oomfer yesterday about faucet timers. So it's getting into the season, at least in New England, where you gotta water your lawn. I'm actually trying to grow a lawn right now, so it's been pretty good the last couple of weeks with rain, so I don't have to worry so much about watering. But we're going into a little bit of a dry spot here, so. We were talking about faucet timers, and I was like, man, I wonder if they make like a Wi-Fi enabled faucet timer. So I looked, and they have Beehive has Wi-Fi enabled faucet timers, and you can chain them together. So like if you have 3 or 4, 5 or 6 different faucets, you can buy like a hub and then have all of your faucets kind of synchronized so that they can kind of stagger how they go on. So, in my use case, I run off, I have a well, so I don't have town water, which watering your lawn off a well is like a terrible idea. But the best way to do it is to stagger it so you don't end up like turning all the sprinklers on at once, because then none of them will get like really super great pressure. So like this system could be useful to like kind of implement that, or also it looks like it did some sort of weather monitoring, so you're not watering your lawn when it's raining. So I just thought it was interesting. We often talk about home automation, and typically we're talking about, light switches and different things inside the home. But to have something like this outside the home where, it can say, oh, it's going to rain today, you don't need to water your lawn. I'm not gonna, turn on your sprinklers, or be able to control your sprinklers from your phone. It seemed pretty cool to me.
You should look up Rakio too as well. I think they're kind of the gold standard sprinkler timer automation system right now. And they have they'll connect to multiple. I think they're an expandable array, so they can connect to multiple sprinklers as well.
The other interesting aspect here was like after I looked at this one product on Amazon, my Facebook feed was full of Beehive other products, like a flood monitor that ties into their hub and will ping you if like the sensor gets wet, which got me starting to think like, oh, this would be cool, like under the sink or like in the basement or like places where you're like you typically don't want a large amount of standing water.
Yep, they're pretty popular.
So Nick, at some point in time you were starting a blog about home automation. Did that go anywhere?
It's got one post,
Okay.
and the post that I have on there, that process actually broke about a month ago, so I need to go back and fix it. And
Fix
maybe
the post and fix the process.
Well, actually, I think I'll probably follow the post, and maybe just update it. The project I was using, which was a wireless or 433 megahertz reader, the project I was using to read it updated, and that update broke a container I was using. I just have to fix it and update the post with the new version.
Right.
It'll revive itself maybe once every couple of years. It'll be the
annual post,
biannual
biannual post.
Yeah. Either once every 6 months or once every 2 years.
2 years.
So how about you, Stephen? What's new with you this week?
Oh, not a whole lot. I get myself another haircut. So I've done it twice already.
Oh, nice.
First time, actually, my daughter gave my haircut. And the other day, I kept asking her, can I get my haircut? She said, yeah, later. You know how it is with kids, right? So I just decided, I was in the bathroom. I said, I'm going to go for it myself. Took out the clippers. And I did the top, and I cut it with the scissors and everything.
Looks good from the front. I'm curious to see the back.
Yeah, I'll turn around. Hang on. This is for viewers only.
Oh wow, that's pretty good. It's looks like a good.
How does it look? I haven't seen it. How does it look?
Good.
I feel like this could be talking Drupal extra content. Steven in his bathroom showing everybody how to do a quarantine haircut.
I just couldn't take it anymore. So so I did that this week. On another front, there was some exciting news from Lenovo last week that they're going to ship a ThinkPad with Linux on it. A line of ThinkPads. It's coming out with Fedora. I don't remember the timeline for it. I feel like September sounds right to me, but maybe it's sooner. But I think it's awesome that, Dell has a line of laptops that come out with Linux, and now ThinkPad, probably the most popular and one of the better lines of hardware out there, is now going to be shipping with Linux as well. So that's pretty cool. Keep your eyes open. In Linux news this week too, Pop OS, which is from System 76, they released their 2004 LTS version in the last 4 or 5 days. So lots of fun stuff happening with Linux these days.
I was going to say, isn't ThinkPad kind of late to the game? I know Dell's been doing the Linux thing for a while. Haven't other companies been kind of allowing you to install Linux on their hardware?
You can install it on anything pretty much, but the key
preloaded, I guess.
Yeah, the key is preloaded, and a lot of major vendors don't do it. No, so I think they're kind of early to the game. So really, you got Dell is probably the only major line. Now you've got ThinkPad, and then you could go to non-regular computers like System 76. Those are only Linux laptops, and there's a few others out there, but it generally doesn't ship on laptops from computer companies. So this is kind of big news, and probably not a surprise, right? Because Fedora is Red Hat.
Yeah.
And IBM bought Red Hat, in the past year? And Lenovo and IBM have a really tight relationship. So it kind of makes sense that this is happening, I think.
As far as ThinkPad used to be IBM.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Makes sense.
Nick, well, how about you? What's going on with you?
So not too much. So weather's getting a little nicer. So we started working on projects again around the house and outside. So I have a vent that goes between my basement and my office, and it's always just kind of annoyed me. Like, it used to be an air, like a forced hot air system, and at some point it was converted to forced hot water. And sorry, give me 1 second. Do you want to just get that going?
What just happened?
Nick left to close the door so we don't have to listen to the dog drinking water.
Yeah, do you want to get that going? Sorry.
While we're doing this, hang on. While we're doing this, hang on a second. I'm going to shut my door because something's going on out here as well.
Everybody's got things going on.
It's a busy.
We never used to have these problems.
It's like the outside noise show. We should retitle the show Outside Noise.
All right.
Yeah. I mean, I can't complain. Trying to open the door to bring me a lemonade. So she was being nice. She forgot that the show was going on. Okay. So where were we? You were asking me.
You were telling us what was going on with you.
Yeah. So this week, the weather's getting nicer, so I was working on some projects around the house and outside. And there's one project since we moved in that we've been wanting to do. There's a vent that goes between the basement and my office. It was just I think the house used to be forced hot air. It was converted to forced hot water. And we have nice hardwood floors, and that vent just always annoyed us. And so this weekend I finally patched it up. We had some leftover hardwood from when we did some work previously, and so I cut out a section, fitted everything in, and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out.
So the patch does not annoy you as much as the vent did?
No, it's funny. One of the reasons why I didn't want to do it is I know how hard it is to get things exact.
Right.
But I ended up getting one of those oscillating tool cutters last year for another project, and so I was able to cut pretty straight lines for that. And it's not perfect, but one of the things that I realized is it's like right when you come in the door is where it was, and I've realized in the last couple of days how weirdly I walked into the office to avoid stepping on the vent. And now I can just walk in the office and not have to do that. So, and it's like anything, like once I get used to it, it'll be fine. And then maybe someday when we're doing another project or refinishing, we'll have a professional kind of replace it. But I mean, it looks nice. There's no vent there anymore. Joanna can't hear me typing downstairs, and I can't hear her talking on the phone.
How did you support underneath where the vent was so the new flooring doesn't drop?
So I did kind of three things. One, I put cross bracing between the two joists. So it was like right in the middle in the bay of between two joists. So I put 3 cross bracing perpendicular. And I really only probably needed 2. And then the subfloor was 3/4 inch. So I put 3/4 inch plywood, to fill the hole. And then I used the oscillating tool to cut maybe 2 inches past the hole.
Yep.
So that the floor itself is bridging the gap as well.
Yeah, right.
And so it's pretty solid. It's not going to go anywhere. And then, in other projects, we have a white rock path out front. We extend that a bit, to the other side to go in front of the other garden. So I was digging outside.
Nick, I was just happy to get my grass cut.
Well, that's my next weekend. I'm going to change the oil in my mower. I was planning on having it serviced, and now I think it's time for me just to learn how to do it myself. I don't think I've changed the oil in my mower since I bought it. It's about time.
So I will say there is some there's something nice about just taking it in, having somebody else do a tune-up, because typically they change your belts and they'll change your blade and they'll do a whole bunch of other stuff too. So it might be worthwhile to look at the cost of that versus like changing your own oil, because ultimately, the air filter, blade, belt, all that stuff is can be time consuming.
Yeah. I mean, the only reason why I'm not is because of coronavirus, and because the only company I found locally that will pick it up said that it just goes to the back of the line, and they don't pick it up like the day before you're due. They pick it up.
Yeah, keep it for 3 weeks.
When you order, and they keep it for 3. Yeah, they said it's usually about 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah.
It's like I can't go 3 to 4 weeks without a snowblower or a mower.
Right. That's why you need to usually do those things at the end of the season.
Yeah. But when I called the person, it was like beginning of the winter, and so I didn't want to pay twice to have them pick up both things, and I couldn't get rid of the snowblower at the time. So we'll see. Maybe I'll get a hand mower.
So now it's time to call about the snowblower and get that tuned up.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm trying to get it done in one project. Like I want to.
No, Nick, that's not how it works.
But we'll see. I'll try to do a tune-up, see if I can change the oil. I mean, there's a couple things like that I got to do next week anyway. So that'll be my update for the next show, whether or not I did that. So this week, as I mentioned, we're talking about a few different topics. But before we jump into that, our story this week is the Drupal 2020 product survey. So back in 2016, Dries put out a survey to find out who was working with Drupal to help them make some decisions based on who interacts with Drupal, on what initiatives should get support and possibly funding. And it looks like it's time for that to happen again. So there is a short blog post on Dries' website that talks about it, and there is a survey. And I think they're looking to find out who uses Drupal, how they use Drupal, what priorities they have. And it looks like the results will be reported at the Global DrupalCon in July, I think.
Yeah, it's a 15-minute survey, it says, to take. I haven't taken it yet myself. And there's no deadline for it, but it seems to me you ought to go soon and spend 15 minutes and do it. It's supposed to provide some useful information for guiding the direction of Drupal in the future. So go check that out. Does anyone remember filling out that survey in 2016?
I vaguely remember filling it out. I don't remember the contents of it though.
I remember filling it out. However, it feels like it was just yesterday. So, time's going clearly very quickly for me.
Yeah, if you we'll have the link in the show notes, obviously, to that Reese's blog post. But if you go find it, he does link to a few other blog posts that he made based on the previous survey. One kind of shows this, I think it was called like Mountain or something. The title of the article is Drupal's long-term growth obstacles, but he shows this graphic of a mountain and the initiatives that they're trying to achieve to get to the peak. And it's interesting when you look at that, because these are things that have been addressed and have been the focus of Drupal over the past 3 years. You can see the climbing to the peak there, focusing on things like media, layout, migration, things like that.
Yep. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating to see how it's driven. I mean, and it kind of broke. One of the things I think was interesting about it is it broke out the different personas, the content authors, the site builders, developers, both front end and back end. I think those are the primary personas in it. And, as Drupal developers, you kind of bridge a lot of those gaps. And at some point of a project, you're probably one of those people, but you certainly prioritize different things. But, one of the interesting things is that I think the majority of people that responded were content authors. And I think that's one of the reasons why Layout Builder was such a big push. And, now that I'm using Layout Builder for a project, it's not perfect. It takes a lot of customization and it really forces you to think differently about content. But my God, does it provide something that almost every client always asks for, like just the ability to sometimes have an image on one side and text on the other, and then in the next section reverse that. Like that's something that traditionally was, a little bit more difficult to implement, and a much more difficult UI for the users. So it'll be interesting to see, how this changes 4 years later.
Yeah, I mean, flexibility is always something that clients are looking for. And it was interesting because before Layout Builder, obviously people were using paragraphs, but other CMSs, I will not name names, but other CMSs kind of had this functionality already. And Drupal got a little bit of a bad rap for that, I think. But we're on the right track now.
Hopefully. And now I think we'd like to give a quick update. Last couple of shows, we've talked a bit about the Drupal Association and the fundraising drive that they've had. We're now currently at 90% of the initial $500,000 goal. That covers 946 donors and 1,160 membership renewals or new memberships. The Triple Your Impact initiative, which was kind of started by Dries and his wife, Vanessa, as well as a bunch of industry regulars. I think it was spearheaded by Oomph and Matt, who were both on the show a couple weeks ago. I think that was fully funded within about a week of it starting.
So it's pretty amazing, right? Probably about 4 weeks ago, we were sitting here talking about this shortfall and what were they going to do. And here we are 4 or 5 weeks later at 90% of the $500,000 goal. So it's pretty amazing that the community stepped up quickly. It'll be interesting to see if that 10% is filled in the next 4 weeks, or they have to be creative to get there. But it's pretty impressive that the community's stepped up now.
So I mean, there is the Pixel website that they just launched in order to get further donation, which we'll put a link to that in the show notes.
John, what is that about?
It's essentially based on the idea of the $1 million website, which, if you've ever gone, is a grid of different logos and images. And basically, what they did was they broke the website into a grid of pixels, and people bought pixels. So Drupal's doing the same thing. If you've already donated, you get a voucher code to put your logo up there, but you can still go and donate, and you'll get another voucher code. I think the breakdown is for every $5 you get 100 pixels. So those designers in the audience will know, like, 100 pixels is not an awful lot, because it's not 100 by 100; it's just 100 pixels. So
so that would be 10 by 10.
Yeah, if you can do math on the fly, like clearly Nick can.
And Steven.
So sure. So the idea here is that, by the end of this thing, we'll have a website full of Drupal supporters, and not just companies. If you go to the website, there are people's headshots, there are pictures of animals, there are logos, all sorts of fun things. So we'll drop the link to that in the show notes. But it's just another idea of how you can kind of have some fun supporting the Drupal Association. So I think people
John,
are.
Do you know if those pixels? You have a voucher. I know that you use the Talking Drupal logo. I appreciate that for your donation. With those pixels are only people who did an extra donation, right? So someone who got a new membership, they didn't get a voucher for pixels. Do you know?
Correct. Yeah, I think they were only for just straight donations.
Gotcha.
Above and beyond your membership. And the website for the audio listeners is pixelsfordrupal.com. Again, we'll toss that in the show notes. But yes, you can see the Oomph logo up there. You can see the Talking Drupal logo up there. Some other notables are the Drupal Easy podcast, Four Kitchens, Centauro, whole bunch of
Nick,
people.
Nick, did you got a voucher, right?
I got a voucher. I couldn't get the right size image, so I kind of gave up on it temporarily. I'll get back to it at some point. I think I got 2,000. I got 60 by 60 or 45 by 45, and it just wasn't accepting. I think they do some rounding somewhere.
There is some rounding, or.
But do they tell you exactly the size you need to give them?
No, which is super annoying.
Kind of difficult. They just say congratulations, you have 2,000 pixels, and then you have to figure out what exactly that means. Okay. And they don't they won't take an image that's the wrong size and force fit it or crop it or whatever. Okay. They just say it just fails silently. So
to be fair, they got this up very quickly. So,
yeah.
And they're using a library from apparently the $1 Million website has a distribution or a library that you can use to build sites similar to that. So I did some research to try to find out what the algorithm was, and I just didn't devote enough time or want to dig too deeply.
But I have to say, one of the things that's fascinating to me, I'm looking at the $1 Million homepage.com, and there's a bunch of companies and stuff. One of the things that's fascinating to me is there's a section called rentpixelads.com. So somebody was reselling their pixels that they purchased from them. And I think that's hilarious that somebody this guy started this kind of on a whim, and then some person out there decided to resell it. And once it took off, the pixels probably were worth far more than just $1 each, on the secondary market. But it's just hilarious to me that there's a secondary market for pixels.
It's also pretty interesting, not to spend a ton of time on this, but it's a very good exercise in good logo development, right? Because there are a lot of logos on here, and some of them do better than others as far as like scaling at really small sizes versus very large sizes.
Well, on the $1 million homepage, size does matter, right?
Yeah.
That's for sure. Fascinating, yeah. And I've never been to this. I never heard of this website until the last few days.
Really?
Never heard of it.
It came out in like late 90s, early 2000s. It was,
okay.
You know, it's old. And this guy, I think he was in college or just graduated at the time, and he started it as basically, hey, let me try this viral idea, and it took off. I mean, he sold all 1 million of them.
That's pretty cool.
So, yeah,
and they all link. They all link to different places.
Yeah, I don't know if the link. I think the links still work. Yeah,
they do. Work. Yeah, I'm clicking on them. Yep. Yeah, it's still an active website. You can tell by the. It's funny because the colors of this make it look like it's from that period of time.
Yeah,
right? When you look at the page,
it's so awful. But yeah, I think what Amazing Labs done is great. Like John mentioned, they put it up in an extraordinarily short amount of time. And it's a pretty cool idea, a pretty cool project. And it worked retroactively. I mean, as soon as it was announced, I had an email saying, "Here's the voucher." I was able to redeem that, no problem. The only difficulties really are just figuring out specifically what size they want. And I don't think it accepts SVGs and things like that, but it's a pretty cool project, and good on them for putting something like this together.
I'm sort of, my head is spinning here, wondering how you can actually, because you get, when someone sells when you sell a pixel, right? Space, that could come to you in any size or any shape, I mean. So at the end of the day, how do you fit all those into a square and have it come out as a square? Because you don't.
I was actually thinking of that the other day, and I gotta feel that at some point there's going to need to be a little bit of a reorg to fit like smaller pixels in where they need to go. But I don't know. I don't know if that's going to be a thing or what.
Probably not, because remember, this isn't like the $1 million homepage where they only had 1 million pixels. They can always increase the size of the grid if they are continuing to get
right. Interesting. Yeah, well, we spent way too much time on that.
Yeah. So our first or maybe second topic of the day is somebody posted a comment in a channel that we're all part of, I think in the NetCamp organizing channel, asking an opinion about views. And the question revolved around, do you build views pages, or do you create a views block and then embed that block, or not embed, but place that block on a page?
A basic page kind of thing, right?
On a basic page. And why would you do one versus the other?
It was interesting that everyone had everyone that was like commenting on that thread. I don't think I did. I came in late and saw it. I think everyone came to the same conclusion and had some pretty strong opinions about it.
Yeah, it was pretty unanimous, where most people said that they didn't necessarily use views pages. Most of the time they built a block and then placed that block on a page. And, I think in prepping for this topic for the show, I was kind of thinking about why that is. And I think a lot of times it comes down to, the use, right? So what the client is trying to achieve, or what the client may need to achieve with that page. And then also what the overall need is. So if the client needs to edit content on that page, so imagine like a blog listing page, right? Where you have a list of blogs, but maybe there's an intro paragraph at the top. If the client needs to edit that, it's far easier for them to go to a basic page, edit that content at the top, and then have the views block underneath the content block, right? However, for a views page, sometimes you have views pages like shop store pages, right? They don't have any content on them. They're simply just views output with filters on the side. That's a good instance where, a views page is perfectly fine for that. It will work just as well as placing a block on a content page.
Well, that's where I slightly disagree. I mean, even in those cases where it's like a shopping page, I typically just use a block, because too many times I've had a client come back to me later and just say, you know what, we told you that just needed to be this content. We never needed to add content above it or below it. And then 3 weeks later, they come back and say, you know what, we changed our mind. We want to add this paragraph up there and we want to change it periodically. Now, that's less of an issue in Drupal 8, because now in Drupal 8, you can say, hey, recreate this page, but make it a block. Whereas in Drupal 7, you could duplicate a page, but you couldn't convert one display type to another. And so if you needed to convert a view page to a block, you basically had to recreate the block. And now you can just kind of duplicate it and then place it. But if it's not an admin view, so there's really, in my book, admin views, they live in the admin theme. So there's not really a basic page doesn't make sense for those. That's the only time I don't create views blocks, pretty much, aside from like specialty things like a JSON display or something like that. But if it's content that's being displayed to a user, I think in the past couple of years, I maybe have created one view that wasn't a block, one or two. Like, it's very, very, very rare for me to create a view page nowadays.
I've got a good reason to not do it. If you've ever had to write code that manipulates pages or learns things about pages and acts differently on a page based on something, for example, like translation, is this page translated or not? It's very easy to write that code when things are pages, so basically nodes. The minute you start mixing pages on a site that are view pages, that same code that you wrote no longer works. You can't use the same code that looks at a page and makes decisions on a basic page and have that code work on a view page. So, and to the user at the end, those two things look the same, but underneath they're so different. So that's one reason that to stay away, in my mind, from view pages and keep them only on the admin side.
It also makes like menu and path stuff look like because a lot of times clients want to, although if there's a view on it, changing the path will sometimes cause problems. But, if you want to give the user the ability to modify the menu, you have to give them access to the menu. And then they have to know that for this particular page, you can't just edit the page and change the menu there. You have to go to the actual menu structure.
Right.
Well, I mean, so for a view page, right, you could still add that to a menu system, but the user wouldn't have the ability to actually edit that menu, right?
Right, yeah.
So that becomes like a, hey, reach out to my developer situation where, I mean, I think in some cases, like, for example, a store page where like you're filtering a list where like that would be okay. Like if you're going to make wholesale changes to that page, there should probably be a little bit more thought put into it than, hey, I'm just going to go in and make these changes. But I think as with anything with Drupal, it's situational.
So the summary, right, is
never use view pages ever
never
again.
Use view pages unless if someone out there listening has a good use case for it that we're just not thinking of or running into us, let us know. I'd be interested to know.
I think they're saying that my use case wasn't good enough. Help listeners. We need a better use case.
I mean, the only reason why I say that, John, is I built a commerce site last year and there isn't a single view page on that site. I mean, they're all they're all blocks. So, it works that way too. And then,
I think the Leica Geosystem site has a view page for their store, but that was designed out. It has facets on it. So, there's a lot of filtering going on that page. So, I think, it comes down to layout. And of course, if the client comes back and says, hey, we want to add something to that page, it's going to have to be in a views header, or it's going to have to be another block added to that page in some way, shape, or form. But I mean, that's, to me, I think that's an acceptable risk. But, I agree with you on 98% of the time. Like, you're not gonna use a views page. You're just gonna put a block on a basic page.
So yeah, as Steven said, I'd be interested to hear people listening what their opinion is as well. If there's a use case where they kind of make an exception to this, or if they go the other way. I mean, I know when I first started out, almost everything was a view page, and over time, I kind of went the other way.
One other item that came up in that chat was the use of meta tags, and how the use of meta tags on views can sometimes be difficult. So if that's a factor for the page that you're creating, that definitely factors in.
Yep. Absolutely.
So Rick, thanks to Rick for seeding this interesting conversation.
Absolutely. There's also some other news in the Drupal world. Claro is the new admin theme for Drupal. I'm not super familiar with it, so I'd be curious to hear if you guys have used it.
So, I wasn't super familiar with it at all until about 2 weeks ago, and started to poke around with it and started to read about it and do some research. And I learned a little bit about it, and I turned it on a few sites that I'm working on just to get a feel for what it looks like and feels like. So let's start there. Has anyone else turned it on and even looked at it?
Yeah, I turned it on for a project that I was working on a couple months ago, and now that I think about it, I'm probably going to turn it on for the new Talking Drupal 8 site that we're working on. So that'll be my second go around with it. But yeah, when I turned it on the first time, I thought it felt really different to me than 7. Obviously I was very used to 7. That was typically what I was using for the admin theme, but it didn't feel bad. It didn't feel bad different, I guess, is what it comes down to, right? It was obviously visually different and had different button styles and things like that. But I felt pretty good about the changes.
So the Claro theme is a new admin theme for Drupal, and it's been, I think, like 10 years since there's been a new admin theme really put into a design. Its focus is a better design, usability, accessibility. You can see as soon as you turn it on that it's going to be way more accessible. And their focus is also have it to work on all devices, so the admin would work everywhere. This project is part of the Admin UI and JavaScript Modernization Initiative, if you're familiar with that. So that's an initiative that started, and this kind of came out of that, and I think they're kind of working together at this point in time. There's a good podcast, and I should have had this ready here. So let me just leave this comment out. Hang on a second, because I don't know. Remember, it was with Preston, but I don't have any of that information available.
Was it Talking
here to edit this?
Was it Talking Drupal?
No, it was a Tag One show that he interviewed the lead for this initiative. I should add that ready. So I'm just going to edit this out. Hang on, Tag One. Let me wave my arms a little bit. I'll pull that out. So an interesting thing about this project too is, as part of this project, they're building a design system for Drupal admin and using that design system to build this admin theme. So it's a big project. And if you kind of think about this, the the user for the Drupal admin is really two completely different people. One is a content administrator, another one is a site builder, right? So those are really two different personas with two different goals, and this theme needs to support those two kinds of people. So I think this is a project that's going to take a long time and is going to have a lot of initiatives that come out of it. I think ultimately at the end, from what I'm reading, they'd love to have a headless interface that's like a React-based kind of tool to maintain content on a Drupal site. And I think that we're really in the early stages of what that might be, a number of years down the road.
Yeah, that'll be really cool once we get there. I mean, one thing that React really does is, make form things really nice, and complex form things are sometimes a lot more usable. And Drupal admin is 90% forms.
Yeah, think about the views interface, right? That's a real complex interface there that is kind of hard to use now, the way that works, but you could see in a React interface, that could be a really slick interface.
Although I do have to mention that last year I worked on a migration from Drupal 6 to Drupal 7. I mean, Drupal 6 to Drupal 8, and I had to work on some Drupal 6 views, and my God, I forgot
how bad it was?
how bad it used to be. Oh God, it is miles and miles better, even in Drupal 7. But yeah, I think, having an additional, I think my big concern is, needing to run Node if you have React or something like that. How is that going to affect local development or deployment or hosting? Drupal 8 already is more complex just because you need Composer and various build processes. So the build part's pretty easy, but the hosting, adding a Node server could be a significant hosting architecture change. So I think that's my one concern. But if it becomes part of core, then I think the major hosting providers will start to provide solutions, and standards will start to be developed.
Do you always need Node? Can't you run compiled JS for React? Like, do you need Node to be running on a hosting environment for that?
I am not an expert in this area, so I'm hesitant to make a definitive answer. I believe possibly for hosting, but for development, I believe you need it.
So yeah, I mean, like that part would be, at least in my mind, it feels easy. Just add it to Lando and have Lando spin up a node environment for you to work with, right? But yeah,
it depends if you're doing any server side rendered things. I mean, there are. I mean,
right.
Because you can serve a React interface from S3. And, S3 doesn't have any server running really. I mean, obviously there's something serving the files, but it's not Node. It's not. But if you have some sort of server side processing, which you probably wouldn't. I don't know if you would need that here or not. I mean, you need to make sure that permissions are respected and that kind of thing. But I think a lot of that can be handled.
Anyway,
so maybe it is just something that's compiled in the way that it can.
I mean, I think overall, if we were to get some React, JavaScript sort of goodness into core, it could add for some very interesting UI elements. And then, the Claro theme is a nice refresh of the Drupal admin, I think. At first, I kind of felt a little bit kind of felt a little googly to me, but I think they've come away from that a little bit, and they've kind of found their own space. So
it's experimental now. So if you're on 8.8, and you probably should be at this point, turn it on, check it out, get some feedback to them. I think the goal is to have this stable in 8.9 or 9, which is right around the corner.
Also, don't be upset if it breaks a little bit, because it is still experimental. They're still working on it. So,
Very cool. And I think the last topic for today is kind of a throwback to something we mentioned a couple of episodes ago. And here's a question. I think we posed it in the episode as well. Is user one still a thing? So we mentioned a couple episodes ago that user one has a couple of special permissions. I'm curious if you guys treat user one any differently, or if you just use that as a general development account. How do you guys think about user one?
So I think of user one as like super user, right? As what it is. And when we had that discussion a few weeks ago, it kind of made me wonder, how is user one really treated different in Drupal 8, and is it? And it still is, right? So let's read this right from the documentation, which is what I took. It says the user one account is special because it's independent of what role is assigned to it. Someone logged in as user one has permissions to do all actions on the site, including viewing, editing all content, editing any user account, changing site configuration, installing and uninstalling modules, and running update scripts. So basically anything. As long as you have user one, it ignores any of the roles and permissions assigned to any task in the website. That's pretty powerful, right?
Yeah. It definitely is. And I find that it runs into issues with paragraphs because I always forget that viewing paragraphs is a separate permission if you have paragraphs permissions enabled. But it definitely is. Yeah, it's a more powerful user, that's for sure.
And it's interesting because on a large number of our sites, typically after development, before the site goes live, we'll disable user one. We'll just turn it off and set the password, store the password in our password vault, and turn off the account where the client as well as our development team, they have their individual logins to the site. And I think that's just a general security best practice. Have everybody have an individual login. And obviously that's for like a much larger site, but I think it applies to everybody. I think even the small site should practice caution. That not everybody's logging in as user one, or that like the user one password is, short and easily guessable, because ultimately that user, Stephen just read it, that user has a lot of power on your site and can do pretty much anything it wants. So once that user is compromised, it's an issue.
So I've had a pretty standard practice for years now to take user one and make the password something crazy, big, long, 24-character thing, and just set it once and never use it again, and always use a Drush ULI to get in as user one when I want to do something. But I can't tell you how many times that has caused me trouble too, because I've logged into a site, done something, configured something as the user one because I did a ULI, I Drush ULI on it, and then passed it off to a user to go test something. And, oh, by the way, I didn't change permissions, because when I was looking at it as user one, everything worked fine. They logged in as administrator or some other role permission, and it didn't work the way it was supposed to because me, as a lazy developer, didn't test it with the proper user permissions.
Steve, just out of curiosity, what's the need for that versus a user role that has administrator?
Yeah, so there isn't one, which is what I was going to get to here, is that I think, like you said, when you guys launch a site, you then kind of disable it. I'm wondering why we don't all just disable it and never use it at all.
Well, so to clarify, it's typically before we launch the site, and typically it is early on in the development process, because we want to get everybody into the pattern of using their own login for the site and
Right.
recording like who's creating what and who's doing what. So, to say it's right before launch is probably a little bit inaccurate. It happens pretty early on, but the account, I mean, is still. We may not be using it, but it may not necessarily be blocked until that's one of our checklist items on our launch checklist is like, hey, is this account blocked? Okay. If it's not, block it. And then, everybody should be using their own logins anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm if I'm the primary developer, like the only developer on a project, then I'll usually use it. If I'm working with a team, then I have my own account. And one of the reasons why I usually won't create a separate one is I don't like to use the administrator role too often because sometimes modules will add permissions to that automatically. And I don't really want to create a separate administrator role just for my user because that's just extra configuration. And
in
the user one
in Drupal 8, the administrator role has things added to it automatically, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, maybe that's something I could start using too. But it just doesn't really. If I'm just the only developer, I mean, it's already my account. If I'm working with a team, then it doesn't make sense for one person to have the extra permission. So it's kind of the same thing. Usually, there's a separate role and a separate user.
One of the other things to consider in this area is something that I'm doing too is. In a test environment, like a stage environment and a dev environment, generally don't have the same users that are in the production system. So when I copy a database over from production to a stage, the user accounts are purged, so they don't come over. And then on the database copy, I generate dummy roles, dummy users that match the roles for testing. So I'll automatically create on the database copy, also create a user for each, like an admin role, an editor role, or site configuration role. And then there's like a generic username and password that people would test with those. I did that because we were sloppily using, user one and ULIs on test environments to test because we don't copy the user permissions over. So something to consider. That makes sense what I just said?
It did, because I was listening and you had said you create the role, like random roles, and I was like, how does he test his roles to make sure that they make sense? And then you were like, no, I create random users. We use
random
standard
users,
roles,
not random roles, right? Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay, all right, that makes way more sense.
So maybe someday I'll do this, but one of the things I've been thinking about doing is and I was thinking about it again this week, and I'll explain what made me think of it again. But I'd be interested in creating a monster Drupal project that just follows every anti-pattern in the Drupal book. And I think random roles and permissions being created and assigned to people. I can just imagine finding a module that does that and just being like, why was this created?
So I mean, that's a topic for another show, but I mean, there are different methodologies for roles, and I think we may have talked about this on a previous show once or twice or 100 times. But it all depends. It all depends if your roles are like more strict and based on what that person needs to do, or if you have like kind of like micro roles where you're like functionality based, like, oh, this person needs access to this part of the site and this person needs access to that part of the site. Then the user has like 6 roles and you're just like, okay, what does the email role do? Like, oh, let me go in and take a look,
I got a question related to this. I'm wondering what you guys do for this. So you got a continuous integration process, CI job, that when you launch code, it spins off something on, let's say, Circle CI or Travis or whatever, and it needs a database to do that. Where does it get the database from that on your CI process? Is it pulling like from
for like testing?
Yeah, it's like if it's doing any BHAT testing or any tests during that CI build, where do you guys pull that database from? Do you have a special database with certain roles and permissions that has a limited amount of data? Do you copy a stage database? Do you actually copy a production database? What do you guys do for that?
Typically it's a backed up database that is sanitized depending on the project. And so, some projects it doesn't really need to be sanitized. Some projects it needs to be sanitized heavily. But it's usually pulling it just from one specific location. The question is more, how often is that updated?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's related to that. And does it have real users in it?
So both those questions depend on the project. Some of them update nightly, and it's just a symlink that just points at the latest nightly thing.
Right.
Some of them, they're up, you update that once in a while whenever you need to. I find the sites that have more sensitive information that needs to be sanitized, that database gets updated more often, because you need to, it's not a manual process. You need to make sure that it's sanitized properly every time, so it's programmatic. And so then at that point, it's very easy just to say, do this every night, and then you can pull that in. And then other ones you just periodically pull in, just when it's like you're testing something that just needs later data than what you have. And so you just run a process. Maybe you still have it kind of coded, but you just don't have it manually. You just don't have it automatically running. Mm-hmm. And so you just run it, once a month or however often you need to.
Trying to think. I think the last time we had to do something like that, we actually scripted basically just built a script that went out and got the database and sanitized it, and did all that stuff as part of the the deployment and the test and everything like that. So
from production though, so you're replicating from the production database?
No, not necessarily from production, because that would be probably a security no. But I think it would pull it from either a backup or from a stage server.
Well, yeah, I think
the stage server would be set to be overwritten every X number of days, what have you.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's while we started with the question of user one here, there is, it's important to pay attention to where else your users are being copied and backed up to and all that other kind of stuff, and making sure you're paying attention to them.
And it's important to think about too now with California's new data privacy laws. Mm-hmm. If the more similar to GDPR it is, if somebody has the right to delete information, you need to delete it from backups too, usually, in some cases. So it's important to know where that stuff is so that you can properly purge it. You don't want to be in a situation where somebody makes a request to delete it, you delete it, then you restore a backup and the data's back, and then you're in violation.
Needless to say, database transporting and sanitation is very important.
Database sanitation.
It's going to be an episode. Just wait, folks. Yep. Just wait.
It's getting added to the list.
Well, if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking, but it's time for us to get to the end of our show here. If you have a question or you'd like to tell us that we got something wrong, you can reach out to us on Twitter at Talking Drupal, or email us at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can get show updates by signing up for our newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you to our patrons for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and push that button that says Become a Patron.
John, if listeners want to reach out to you, how can they get a hold of you?
You can find me on all the major social networks at John Picozzi, and you can find out about Oomph at oomphinc.com.
And how about you, Stephen?
I'm Stephen Cross on Twitter, and that's Stephen with a PH.
And
Nick?
you can reach me at NixVan, NICXVAN, pretty much everywhere. Have a good week, guys.
Take care, guys.
Have a good one.
Bye.
I move that we add this statement to the close every week. If you enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.
I loved it, John. That was great.
Wait. We should add talking Drupal.
I think just talking.
Yeah, just the way you said it was perfect.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know if we need to add that every week.
Yeah, no, we should.
Line.
Yep, it's a good
All right.
line. All right, guys.
That's John's. Yeah.
It's after 5. It's after 5 o'clock. So
Yeah.
I'm,
Yeah.
you know, the filters are off.
All right.
I immediately apologize for the background noise.
No problem.
Right.
I think we got some camera shots of people passing by. I'm not sure I can get them all out, but
Yeah, I wouldn't.
All right.
I wouldn't so much worry about it. I
okay.
mean, do what you can, I guess. But
All right.
they risk that knowing that there's live recording going on.
Is it okay if I catch Laura beating one of your kids over the head in the background?
she's pretty good about doing that off camera. So
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
I think one of the times she was passing, she like realized halfway that you were recording because she just like stopped and looked and then looked back and kept going.
I think I think as long as you get the you didn't get the part where she said she was going to kill one of the kids. That's fine.
All right, guys.
Right.
Have a good one.
Bye.